Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Thought Leaders of India, the Expert Series. I'm Yentrul, your host for today, and I'm thrilled to have each and every one of you here despite the weather. So, thank you for making it. Today's speaker is Mr. Prithviraj Srinivas, Chief Economist at Mahindra Group. He will be addressing the topic Election Economy Decode, and where he will share his insights on economic trends and implications of the election outcomes on the business diaspora. So, Mr. Srinivas has extensive experience in capital markets research in South Asia and is a highly skilled economist who has dedicated the past 20 years to refining his expertise in economic research, econometrics, macroeconomics, FX and interest rate strategy, as well as capital markets. So, Mr. Srinivas, you have the room.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And I'd also like to sort of thank Rishi for the opportunity and thank everyone for sort of making it here despite the weather. And Sarvesh, a pleasure. Look forward to having this discussion. I know the topic said that decoding elections and the economy, and I kept looking at that that word elections, and I said, what do I decode now? Because pretty much a lot of things are there on the table already. So what I did do was to try and put on an economist hat and look at it. So the way I've structured this presentation is to first set the context, right? I think there is a certain context in which India is operating in, and there's a larger global context, and there's a little bit more of a near-term context that we have, and that's the context in which policymakers are working. So what I hope to sort of achieve by the end of this presentation is to give you a sense of what's the environment in which we are operating today, right? And therefore, if certain decisions are being made, why are they being made? Okay. So the first chart here, I'll try and flip through certain charts quickly, but it's just to sort of get the narrative going. This is the only chart on elections. So what we did is to construct something called a misery index, and a misery index is nothing but inflation plus unemployment rate. And we did this for 2 periods across states. One is May 2024 and May 2019. So pre-COVID to post-COVID and election period. And if there's been an increase in misery, which means that there's been higher unemployment and inflation versus 2019, then clearly the voter base is displeased, right? I would say that this is not the only criteria for people to vote, but this is a factor, and this sort of data gives you a sense that look, Andhra Pradesh, Rajasthan, Haryana, very clearly there was anti-incumbency. But if I look at across the board, I don't think that we went into 2024 election with serious amounts of anti-incumbency, because inflation was well managed compared to the past. Unemployment rates by and large were lower. So there were certain pockets where it was elevated, and that actually you could see that voter dissatisfaction play out. So we saw a switch in government in Andhra Pradesh. We saw a switch in government in Haryana as well as in Rajasthan, right? And maybe a bit of a loss that we saw even in UP. I don't know how much I would put it out to anti-incumbency. It could be consolidation of votes and therefore having lost some ground. Net, the key takeaway is that I don't think there was as much anti-incumbency going into 2024 for BJP. In fact, almost 7 million additional people voted for the BJP this time. So there were roughly about 38 million additional voters, right? So the voter base had increased. 2019, about 603 million people voted. This time around 642 million or so people voted, right? So BJP unfortunately was not able to capture a large part of that additional increase. So despite 7 million people more voting for the BJP, they sort of lost just about 1%, less than 1% vote share, and that sort of cost them 63 seats net. It's really about where they lost that vote share more than anything else, and maybe UP was probably a little bit of a shift there, and that sort of, I don't know how much of that can be put down to anti-incumbency, right? But the key takeaway here is that unemployment rate and inflation will matter to voters, and I think that is something that policymakers will take away from this. That if they've lost vote share in certain spaces, it's because there is some amount of disaffection. So just a quick recap on the medium term context in India. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. A lot of things would be pretty obvious, but I just want to sort of go through this as a narrative, right? India is going to add an entire US population, about 300 million people, over the next couple of decades. So that's an entire US population fitting into our borders. So developing human capital is going to become the biggest sort of challenge as well as opportunity for us. If you think about what's the biggest resource that India has, it's people and it's human capital, right? And if I look at the chart here on the left hand side is going to show you the average age of people who've entered the entering the workforce, right, between 15 and 24 years. And what it tells you is that right now there's about 9 years of education. Every person who's joining the workforce today is on average got about 9 years of education. The theoretical average is about 18. I think Singapore and the others score very high. It's about 14 and a half, 14 years. We are at 9. We were at about 6 or 7. And at 9 years, we are somewhere close to where China was in 2000. And that's a point when China really took off, right? And they joined the WTO and they took off. So when you ask me, do we have the human capital to do what China did? Answer probably yes, right? But we still have to sort of keep building on it. There's a lot of numbers here, but it's really telling you that the government has a goal of Viksit Bharat. What it basically means is that we sort of get into a developed market status by 2047. We are at $2,500 per capita income at this point in time. To become developed or to be classified as developed, then we need to, at that point in time, cross somewhere around $12,700. So it's an additional $10,000 of per capita income jump. So not only will we have 300 million more people, but we will also have more people with more income. So that's really the goal that we are talking about, and this means it's going to really supercharge certain sectors. What I've tried to do here is to look at the consumption basket of China, which is near about $10,000-12,000 per capita income today, and looked at where India is today, right? And if I sort of superimpose and say that, look, when India becomes Viksit, its consumption basket is going to look like China's, then it means sectors such as health, transport, housing is going to grow up 10-15x times from where they are today. That's a tremendous amount of growth, demand, resource usage in the country. I'll come back to this a little bit later. Resource usage is going to be tremendous from India, right? I mean, this chart basically is telling you that this is from OPEC, and they basically believe that most of the oil demand is going to come from developing markets, particularly India. So India is going to be the single largest country from where demand will continue to remain for oil, for crude oil. So we are at about 5 million barrels per day. The US and China are at about 15-16 million barrels per day in terms of consumption. So they believe India's will go up to about 11 to 12 million odd barrels per day, right? So we will show significant amount of demand for resources. But the question is, from when you look at it from a sustainability and an environment angle, we want to grow, but it will incrementally matter how we grow. This chart is showing average annual temperature in India, and this is a chart that's pulled out from the RBI's document actually. And it clearly shows that as we started to grow, particularly 2000 to 2007-8, even our average temperatures started to rise. And while we are a vast country, we also have a fragile ecosystem. So we can get impacted by floods, heat waves, cyclones and all of that, right? So taking care of the environment, the climate, while we grow will become extremely important. And just this chart that I want to mention is that geopolitics is incrementally in our favor. It will be very important for us to sort of ensure that we keep this in favor, and this is one of the big things that will be a game changer for India. You've all heard of the Belt Road Initiative by China. So this India, Middle East, Europe corridor is going to be the next big thing. It was unveiled during the G20. So it's going to be a trade route and a pipeline that bypasses the Suez Canal. So a land route that goes through Saudi Arabia, the Haifa port in Israel, and then on to Greece and Jordan. So now it will give you a little bit of context when you read the newspaper and you read, whatever was said even yesterday, right? That Israel sort of threatening Lebanon, Israel sort of trying to protect the Haifa port and the northern part of Israel and asking the Hezbollah to sort of back off. It has implications for this entire plan. Yeah. And it also gives you a context why Saudi Arabia and Israel are now incrementally sort of burying the hatchet and coming closer as well. Because with this pipeline, the idea is that it will cut short the time for transit to Europe. India is also pushing part of its solar alliance because both India as well as West Asia is blessed with the sun, right? And to try and connect the electricity grids so that when it's daylight, it's night time elsewhere. So if the grids are connected, then you can have renewable energy for a vast section of the population, and also a pipeline for green hydrogen, also a pipeline for communication lines. So right now you have undersea pipelines, so instead you could have these pipelines going over land which are protected, etc. So pretty important geopolitics wise as well. So this is the context in which we are sort of currently operating in, where we have a large number of people, a huge amount of resources that will be demanded. Geopolitics will be extremely important for our growth, and the environment will matter. So how we grow will also matter. If I look at the near-term global context, the demand momentum is improving. Manufacturing momentum. So this is PMI. The chart on the left-hand side is giving you developed markets PMI. PMI, if it is below 50, it means that manufacturing is contracting. Above 50, it's expanding. You can see that the red line, which is on the chart on the left hand side, is now at 50, which means that broadly the developed markets are starting to do better. They're doing better than expected despite all the rate hikes. And the services side of the economy is also sort of improving. It's doing far better. It's above 50 and expanding. So the current context is that the global economy is doing better than expected. Momentum is improving despite the sharp rise in interest rates. World trade, however, I think maybe there's a bit of stagnation at this point in time. It could be a bit of there could be some range bound movement. The line chart, which is the in blue in color, that's basically telling you the global trade in volume terms, and the slope of the line is really telling you growth, right? So if it is a steeper slope, then it means much faster growth. We may not have the kind of steep global trade growth that we saw between 2000 and 2007, right, which lifted India's growth as well. Over the last few years, yes, global trade has bounced back. It grew at about 3% in volume terms, expected to grow at 3.3% in the coming year. So there is improvement, but given the kind of noise around tariffs, especially the US elections that will happen later this year is going to be pretty important, because if Trump does come back to power, then he's already promised 10% tariff across the board, which some believe that if it were to be implemented, then it could cut global growth by a couple of percentage points easily. So global trade as such may not give you the kind of lift to growth as it did in the past. So if we have to grow our exports, it means that we have to grab market share. It means that we have to become a lot more efficient, a lot more competitive if we have to grow, right? Just giving you a sense on cost of capital. Cost of capital is pretty elevated. I just read a news article today that in Japan, some of these digital banks are offering 10.5% deposit rate for Japan, with a shrinking population, with an economy that's pretty stagnant, right? So cost of capital, of course, these are teaser rates apparently, to try and get deposits from traditional banks. But just to give you a sense that even in a aging society, fully developed market, deposit rates are around 10.5%. So cost of capital is pretty elevated, and the expectation that central banks will cut rates has not materialized yet. Of course, ECB cut rates quite recently, it's just started, but the US Fed, I think they've reduced their expectations. So it's quite possible that we still have some elevated cost of capital or interest rates for some more quarters, right, before it starts to come off. Inflation is coming off everywhere, but we'll have to wait and see. One of the reasons why the economy is still doing well despite this high cost of capital is because governments, that's a chart on the right hand side, it is showing you the primary deficits. The governments continue to spend, or they're pulling out their stimulus much more slowly than the central banks. In fact, in the US case, it was moving in the opposite direction. So governments are spending. They're spending to bring productive capacities within their borders. They are spending to for energy security, particularly in Europe, and there's and definitely sort of propping up a bit of consumption for the bottom half of their society. So just a recap here, when it comes to the global side of the economy, momentum is improving. Trade, there are question marks. Cost of capital, I think it'll take a little bit of time for cost of capital to come off. In India, this is just IIP, industrial production. What I've done is basically shown you total output in 2023 versus 2019. And you can see that clearly construction goods, capital goods are well above pre-COVID levels, whereas consumer goods were still trailing at the end of 2023 December. And when I go deeper into consumer goods, maybe cars were above pre-COVID level in terms of total sales, but two-wheelers, garments, shoes, I think there things were still sort of trailing. It clearly tells you that we've had a K-shaped recovery, and the bottom half of the K, they were still trying to catch up. But what has driven growth are two things. One of them is this. You can see this is CMI's investment under implementation. Couple of years ago, almost 2/3 of all investments announced were from the public sector, and 2/3 of current implementation is from the public sector, whereas investments announced, 2/3 of current investments announced is from the private sector right now. So private sector investment intention is extremely strong. It's still not translated to implementation on the ground. So we believe that as confidence starts to kick in, consumption demand comes back up, especially from the bottom half of the income pyramid, you should see that investment demand starts to sort of pick up, particularly from the private sector. So there is a sense that it's impending, that something is about to happen. It clearly is there. The data is sort of showing it as well. This is, apart from, let's say, the corporate side and the public side, the housing cycle is clearly turned. It's turned for the positive. This chart here on the right hand side is showing you household construction as a share of GDP. I typically find that there's a 12-year cycle, about 5-6 years down, 5-6 years up. Our last peak was 2012. It came off. I expected it to be a pretty deep one because there were certain tax changes, etc., which sort of did not help as well. And this entire, I think, movement against the black economy also sort of, to some extent, should have sort of contributed to a deeper cycle in that sense. Now housing has picked up, and you can see that construction demand is pretty strong. So this has been one of the reasons why you're seeing housing turn up. But why is housing up, right? My sense is that this chart really tells you why India is shining, why India is looking so good, why the economy is on such a strong footing. This is quarterly services exports as a share of GDP. The chart I showed you earlier was goods trade, right? Goods trade may be stagnant, but services exports is clearly doing extremely well. The last time that we saw that services export do this well was 2003 to 2006-07, and we all know that was the boom period, right? And the big trend right now is about these global capability centers, where multinational companies have already are setting up centers on their own rather than coming through a partner. The data there is still positive. The outlook is quite positive. Almost 150 MNCs have set up shop over the last 2 years. That's about 20-30% of S&P, and they believe that it could go to about 45-50% of S&P over the next couple of years. So another $40 billion of services exports is quite possible. So this has been a big turnaround for why our dollar income is so strong, and this is basically high quality jobs, right? You hire one person there, it's equal to hiring 4-5 others. It's an indication of why urbanization is so strong. Urbanization, housing, vehicle demand, etc. Right? And then my sense is that this should continue. The other big reason was, of course, government capex. But government capex is coming on the back of additional borrowing. So I don't think it's completely sustainable. Maybe government can continue to do the kind of investments that it has done over the last few years, but maybe not up the game even further from here. So that's clearly not possible. So there is a certain sort of ceiling to what can be done. Just a last point on the K-shaped recovery. The bottom half, according to me, is catching up. You can see that agri wages are beginning to rise. It's been the best that it's been in several years, and one of the reasons is because of this faster pace of urbanization we just spoke about, right? These GCCs coming and setting up jobs, your construction is booming. It's pulling out all the surplus labor that was there in rural India, who had all gone back during COVID. So there you had labor surplus, which had depressed wages, and now that that labor is coming back into cities, the labor market in rural India is beginning to tighten and therefore push up wages there, right? So definitely helping them to catch up with inflation uh, at this point in time. So that's one of the reasons why we're starting to see a lot of firms begin to talk about a bit of recovery in rural side on the FMCG. Yeah. So just my last set of slides. We've got a bit of context on the medium term outlook, the global side, and where we are. The India side is that, look, I think there is still a lot of catch up after COVID, particularly for the bottom half. The positive signal is that it's starting to take place. Apart from that, a big driver is our increased export market share, particularly for the services side. The outlook is pretty strong. So urbanization, the pace of urbanization has picked up. It's going to continue to remain pretty strong, right? Now, this is the context for India. So what are the policymakers sort of have to think about? I'll just start with a little bit of, again, medium term. I honestly was thinking about how to present this. A lot of us already know much of this, right? I mean, it's old news for a lot of us. But what I try to look at here is, since everybody is trying to build their productive capacity all over the world at this point in time, so there is a productive capacities index that the United Nations does for each country and breaks it down and ranks it as well. So you can clearly see that our productive capacity is definitely well below the US and China. And one of the reasons is that our human capital is lower, our transport capacity is lower, our private sector enterprise or access, ease of doing business is lower, and the reforms pace, or the pace at which labor is able to move from agriculture, out of agriculture into industry and services, is also lower than China and the US, right? So the dynamism is weaker. So these are the areas that obviously we'll have to work on. And if you ask me, one of the real, I mean, sort of the easy way to think about it is, we really need to work on education, we really need to work on energy, we need to work on ease of doing business and transport. So it's E cube and T. Interim budget sort of gave us a little bit of a sense. The government is working on lowering logistics costs. It had this Gati Shakti program, which is basically trying to build out some linkages, multimodal transport, so try and bring linkages between rail, road, airports, ports, etc. Now, one of the big things that they announced was the 3 corridors for the railways, which is the freight corridor, mining corridor, and a high traffic corridor. I think that's going to be continue to receive attention as we spoke. We need to reduce logistics cost to become more competitive. If you want to grab market share for exports, you can't do it otherwise, right? Second is that climate and energy security is a big thing. So green energy is on top of the cards. They've already announced this rooftop solar, so that's going to be a big thing that I think the details will get unveiled in the upcoming budget. The third big one is about human capital, and there I think there's going to be more focus on industry academia interaction. They are announced a 50-year loan for R&D to the private sector. So it's really about trying to build on innovation, knowledge, improve that human capital base for India, right? I think that's where the budget is sort of trying to focus on. It will give you a sense of why they're doing this. This is my sense, my last sort of slide, and it gives you a sense of what could be there in the 100-day agenda. What's happened between the last budget to now is the election result has not been a thumping victory as one would have hoped for. But on the fortunate side, tax collections are extremely strong. We've had record RBI dividends, so they do have space. They do have fiscal space to try and maybe spend a little bit on the social side and on the capex side, and not really sort of hurt fiscal. But I think here, the important question here is, what does the economy need, right? One of the things that we just discussed is, we said that private sector investment intention is pretty strong, and they're starting to invest. We need to create those jobs, private sector jobs. So do you then use that additional money that you have to pay down debt, get a credit rating upgrade, which brings down the cost of capital for the private sector? Or do you keep that money and spend it on social sector schemes as well as on capex? So I think that's the question that they're currently facing. What do I do with that money? As an economist, and based on the data we presented, I think most of us would argue that you pay down debt, bring down your ratings, and try and give most of that money to the private sector. So you bring down the cost of capital for the private sector. But my sense is that they'll probably sort of do a little bit of a balancing act there. So a few things that are expected: more FTAs. A big thing that we should sort of look out for is this. One of the databases that we created post-COVID was an e-Shram database, because something that we did not have was a record of all the migrant workers, people who are working in the unskilled profession, skilled, semi-skilled sort of profession as well. So we've got a database now. So there are about 230 million odd people who've registered there. That database is extremely interesting, where you can actually see, there are, how many carpenters are there in which area, which district, etc. So the database is there. So now I think they're going to try and see how they can link that with either a DBT sort of a benefit, or even try and work with private sector, how they can leverage. So somebody like a staffing company could sort of leverage that database to match demand with supply. Or if you have to target a skilling program, you will be able to do it a lot better than before. So I think this is something that we can expect over the next couple of years. There is going to be more focus on industrial clusters, so trying to generate those jobs. Tourism is also going to get a little bit of a leg up because it's a job generating sector, but of course there'll be a whole sustainable tag attached to it as well. Of course, streamlining logistics, trade, some custom procedures, those are in the works. They will try and make sure that it's far easier to sort of trade. And MSMEs are going to be a big talking point. There may be some export in the sort of exports or a credit incentive package that gets discussed. And as I mentioned, continue to invest in those rail corridors, logistics corridors. So the whole idea through all of this is India should be able to export more. And to do that, we bring down the cost. We make it far easier to trade, far easier to export. And we try and keep building that human capital so that, we become a lot more efficient, more productive, etc. So that's where I'll stop it and hand it over to Sarvesh here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Srinivas, for that informative presentation. And thank you for shedding light on the potential and definite changes in the economy as well. Now, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Sarvesh. a partner at SR Bartley Boy and Associates LLP, and also a member of Thought Leaders of India. With more than 2 decades of experience in public accounting, he has developed a strong reputation within the banking community. His expertise lies in auditing banking companies in both India and Europe. Mr. Varthi, we cordially invite you to participate in a moderated discussion along with Mr. Srinivas.
Thank you so much. So, after a very insightful presentation, I think I had prepared some questions, but a lot of them have been answered. We may dive a little more into these, but before we get into this, so Srinivas, Prithviraj Srinivas as an economist. You don't know that he is an avid traveler as well. His aim is to go to every state in India. Most of it he's covered. Some yet to happen, but
with the children, introduce them.
Yes, and 2 boys. So that's the idea. So that's a personal side to him. I will open up for questions as well, but let me go through some and then we can go ahead. So we did speak about how the election result has come out, and in a way not a thumping majority, but at the same time the government looks stable, stronger opposition, which is a good thing. How do you think the economic reforms policy will work? I mean, the government has been doing economic reforms at a certain pace with a brute majority. With this kind of a verdict, do you think there will be a change in the way economic reforms are being looked at?
So the way I would answer is, see, I've been looking at India for quite some time, and this whole reforms question keeps coming up, and through multiple governments, right? And many people tell you that reforms in India happen very slowly, or they happen when there is a crisis, so never let a crisis go to waste, etc., etc. Now, when we had a brute majority last time around, now for you to seriously carry out certain structural changes, you require a 2/3 majority both in the upper and lower house, which they haven't had, and doesn't look like they will have now as well. And it means that you really need a consensus building approach to be able to push a lot of these reforms. My hope is that maybe now with a coalition sort of set up, it's not a deeply fractured coalition. There is, like you mentioned, it seems a little bit stable, and the whole consensus building approach might sort of help push quite a few of these reforms, right? I mean, your coalition partners themselves are also networked with the opposition, and they should be able to sort of be a partner and help you. And if you look at the comments that are coming from the significant coalition partners, while they do not want to take an active part in the main government, they are mainly looking for support for their own state, right? So some funding, some attention going towards them. So my sense is that whatever agenda and plan that the government had prepared for itself even before elections, because it was absolutely confident it's going to come back, I don't see big changes in a lot of that implementation. But yes, I mean, maybe one change could be that a bit more of a consensus building approach probably will get us a lot of things that need to get done.
No, I think that's interesting. And if we really move from economic reforms to fiscal policy, right? Our deficit has been reducing. Do you see with this kind of a government more populist measures which will increase the deficit further, given that states will ask for more money, specific states, and then you have to maintain parity across everybody? Would you think that it will impact the fiscal deficit?
Yes, to some extent, there could be a bit more funds being diverted. The the quality of spending that we've been talking about over the last few years has significantly improved, right? I mean, central government capex spending was 1.6% of GDP. It has gone to over 3% right now in the last few years, and the impact of that, all of us can sort of visibly see it, feel it, right? My sense is that there will be some diversion, but fortunately, the economy is doing extremely well. Tax collection is robust, so the impact or the sacrifice that the government needs to do to manage some of these trade-offs may not be as harsh as, let's say, if the economy was not doing so well. So I think they're in a good position to make some of these balancing acts, and it's not going to derail their. I don't think it is going to derail their, their plan to build out the logistics infrastructure, etc. I mean, the plans to build those rail corridors, etc. I mean, it's going to continue to sort of be on track, is my sense.
That's great. The other aspect of the whole economic policy will revolve around interest rates, and you did mention a bit of it, but do you see the interest rates coming off in India faster than what you see globally?
Yeah, it's an interesting question that it's a bit of a tussle in my head as well at this point in time, because if you look at growth, we are growing at about 8% odd growth, right? And inflation has come off, but the risks to inflation remain pretty high, and we've just been reminded of that time and time again, that since food is a very significant part of our consumption basket, and food in the whole food supply chain in India is extremely vulnerable to these climatic shocks, right? So we might be confident in inflation, being near 4% at this point in time, but if weather patterns change a bit, and then it sort of goes off track very quickly, right? So my sense is that if the economy is doing extremely well, and if you look at RBI's actions, it's trying to sort of curtail certain excesses in certain parts of the financial system, and the last message from the RBI governor was that they want to try and ensure that there is further transmission of past hikes. It's not an indication that the central bank is starting to look at rate cuts anytime soon. The space to cut rates is there, but given that the economy is doing extremely well, maybe the RBI has space to wait as well.
Interesting. You did touch upon foreign trade and the whole corridor that is being formed. We are also quite aggressive in our foreign policy, but geopolitics is not really in our favor. Whether it be the Russia-Ukraine or what is happening in the Middle East. Do you see that as a big threat from a trade perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree with you that we don't have the sort of benign situation that we had, say, mid 2000s. The kind of run, I mean, we saw 9% plus GDP growth at that point in time, and we knew that, we now know that, I mean, quite a bit of that was supported by world trade doing so well. And you can see from policies in other countries that everyone is trying to set up their own production capacities. They want to make sure that they secure certain technologies within their borders. They secure energy within their borders, etc. So which means that to some extent, world trade is going to get impacted at the margin. So in that case, that India will have to play the whole geopolitical game, and we would all agree that over the last few years it's played it extremely well, right? We've come out unscathed, buying Russian oil, right, and remaining friends with the Western world. So I think it's really about that. We've just signed an FTA with Switzerland and a few other countries. There's an FTA that's going to get signed with Oman. There are FTAs on the anvil with Europe and UK. So we'll have to do a lot more of those bilateral deals and trying to secure a larger market for ourselves. So there's going to be a little bit more hard work compared to the past. So my sense is that if we want a larger market, to play in a larger market, then we'd have to really sort of really get onto the negotiating table and try and play for that. It's not going to be as easy as it was before.
Yeah, but I think you mentioned it correctly that we played it very well, and the good part is that most of the players have been consistent and they are part of the new government as well. So in that sense, that continuity is there, which will help us.
Absolutely, I think that's one big positive takeaway from the election outcome.
Yeah. One of the things where the government, even when it had a brute majority, was not as successful is in agricultural reform. With a little bit of a fractured verdict, how do you see that playing out?
It's going to be a tough one, and one, because agriculture as a subject is governed by both the central government as well as the state government, in that sense, large parts of it, right? So just the central government's position on it is not going to change, or change matters on the ground. It really will have to be something that happens across the board, just like how GST took place, right? You had a coming of minds, meeting of minds across states and across the central government, and we'll need something like that if we really have to push through agricultural reforms, because if you think about it, it's more than 60% of our population and a significant part of our GDP as well. If you take both agri as well, pure agriculture, as well as agriculture that contributes to services, agriculture that contributes to manufacturing, it is fairly significant. So my sense is that since it touches so many lives, it will have to be political consensus across the board for something to work, right? That was the case even before, and it's the case till today.
That's true. And again, staying on agriculture and related, while the growth in India has been quite significant, evident to a lot of people, but is it happening at the same pace in the rural economy? And that is up for debate. Yes, it is growing, and some people say that the pyramid structure that we had in terms of the rich and the poor is slowly becoming like a diamond structure, but the pace at which the cities are growing is faster than the rural economy. And will that create discontent? And how does the government, what do you think the government should do for that area incrementally to what it is doing?
So I just want to recap on, there were 3 points, right? Post COVID, when you think about it, that's when I think people are talking about inequalities having risen. There were 3 things that we spoke about. One, we said services exports shot up, which is more of an urban phenomena, right? Then we said government spending in infrastructure picked up. There's an urban and a rural side to it. And because they were building out railway stations across every district, etc., right? And the other thing that happened was commodity prices shot up, right? So there was a massive terms of trade gain for the farming community. So we started exporting more rice, and so in that sense, when commodity price inflation moves up, there is a positive impact on the rural side of the economy as well. So when you think about rural India, there are 3 main pillars for income streams. One is the farm income. So that was doing well. So that's why you had, even if you look at certain surveys, they say that the rural rich has gone up quite significantly, and that can be evidenced by tractor sales and the kind of vehicle sales, etc., that is taking place there, right? Or even the penetration of financial products such as mutual funds, etc. There. The other stream, so that's one stream of income for rural India. The second stream for rural income, rural India, is government spending. The government spending was also there, be it through Narega or through the roads projects, etc. The third income stream, and an important one, was remittances. That is, people who were working in cities and sending their money back home, or working abroad and sending their money back home. On working abroad, an interesting trend is that you are seeing the Middle East build out, particularly Saudi Arabia putting a lot of money, and some of that immigration stamp required data shows you that it's now the labor migration is more from Orissa, UP, West Bengal, rather than Kerala as in the past. So there is you can expect that as Saudi Arabia builds out its cities, etc., I mean, you should see some remittances from abroad going into those rural India. But the other big missing factor over the last few years was really about urban migrants and sending their money back home. Now, because cost inflation had moved up quite significantly, some of them could not move back. There was no incentive to move back. But now, as like we just spoke about, housing has picked up quite significantly. It's sort of started with services exports jobs being generated in those GCCs. Those households started to spend money. They started to hire labor. They started to demand homes, drive construction. It's starting to pull labor out of rural India. So remittances should also sort of improve. I completely agree with you that rural did not perform as well as it did because this main thing was missing. But with faster pace of urbanization, I think that one main income stream should also get restored in the next couple of quarters. So I'm pretty hopeful that that whole K-shaped will begin to narrow. It did not do as well as urban over the last couple of years, but my sense is that it will begin to narrow over the next couple of years.
And the other thing, what people talk about, that arguably the government has, while it has done very well on digital and infra and stuff like that, but labor reforms is something that we have not done as well as compared to what we see abroad. And human capital is probably our biggest capital. So how do you think that is going to play out with this new government?
So we try to sort of bring these new labor codes, and but like I said, this is also a subject for the central government as well as the state government, right? I mean, both have powers to write rules on there. And if today's newspaper, there was an article which where the central government is saying that states should try and align their labor laws along with the center's model labor law, and even encouraging West Bengal to rewrite their sort of labor laws, right? So it goes back to that point of will the new government be more of a consensus builder? And if it does, I think it should be able to bring in changes in these tricky subjects such as agriculture, labor, where you really need to work with local governments. If the thought process earlier was that, look, I will try and if I will try and sort of come to power in all these areas and then I'll be able to affect change, maybe now you sort of take a position that, look, I need to work with all powers to affect that change.
So this consensus building seems to be a theme for everything that the brute majority couldn't do on its own, which will be very interesting to see how that pans out.
It will be interesting to see, because some of the points that we that we keep going back to, right? I mean, labor reforms, agriculture reforms are not new. I mean, we've been talking about this for quite some time. We know that we've now realized that, look, I mean, it really needs consensus. It needs everybody to sort of get on board. So you really need somebody who can bring everybody on board to get this through, because these are changes that affect a lot of lives, and it can't be done by a single entity, right? It needs to be done at an institutional level and spread across the board, and in a manner that where everybody sort of agrees to it. It's not that we have not done this before. I mean, GST is an example. I mean, we sort of brought everybody to the negotiating table, and it's not the perfect one, but we do have something where we can start to improve upon, right, in the future.
Yeah, but that was a bit early on in the first term. It has become worse. So how does Modi become Vajpayee is the question now, to see how that will pan out. But I mean, we've as a country done well on innovation, digital technology, startups, but a lot of these startups are now growing. Uh, what we've seen in the past is that once they reach a certain size, the government policies are not as favoring to them as they are when they're smaller. Do you think? I mean, how do you think that should evolve? Because now, while there are new startups coming in, but some of the startups have matured. Uh, what policy changes can come in? I mean, we see so many startups after they reach a scale, they want to set up shop in Singapore or they in Hong Kong, and don't want to stay in India. I mean, it's tax is one element, but also regulatory.
Honestly, I mean, I wouldn't have good enough knowledge there to sort of give you a informed comment. Um, but yeah, it's something that we'll have to sort of look into, and it goes back to the whole ease of doing business thing. We shouldn't be losing business to these satellite centers in Dubai and Singapore, and etc. It sort of comes back to this question that I had for you, right, which is the whole gift city that the central government is looking at. Do you think that gift city can become the financial gateway? I mean, it's continuously receiving additional regulatory sort of support, so can it become the financial gateway for the country?
I think early days, lots of hard work has been put in. Many new banks have come, exchanges have come. There's a tie-up between the Singapore Stock Exchange, NSE, Bullion Exchange, educational institutions, fintech hubs. All of that is happening, but it is still early. There are teething problems, and they're bound to be. But if you look at it from the perspective of you take the largest financial centers across the world. You have a New York, London, Singapore, Hong Kong, maybe Dubai, IFC. Ignore New York and London, they have a large history. Scales are unmatchable at this point in time. But if you look at Singapore, they started off with a tax break. They started off with political stability, strong legal and regulatory framework. You take Hong Kong, that started off as a conduit to China, but their regulatory framework was stronger, much more stronger. So there was this trust that came in. With China exercising more control, that trust has begun to wane, and that is one element that Gift City can look at. But what Hong Kong did very well was to build out a very robust, liquid and deep stock market. So that is something that one should look at. If you look at Dubai, they are unique. In fact, they have their own civil and commercial courts which are outside, which are different than what UAE is. And in a way, there is this political stability. So it's all a question of building that trust. Gift City has the tax benefits, is creating the infrastructure, so all the right noises are being made. If there is political stability and long-term political stability, I think it will do very well. But the political stability is the question.
And what about carving out like how Hong Kong has, some of these international judges coming in, arbitrating there. Would something like that help in improving trust?
Certainly, but it is still, again, as I said, early days. If you look at how the regulation is unfolding, there are still gray areas. We need to sort that out. I deal with a lot of entities in Gift City, and what I see is that while the regulator there is fairly supportive, wants to do things in the right manner, but there is an override of the Indian laws. While you say that, okay, this is not India, this is a separate economic zone, but they say that wherever the laws are, or where the regulation of Gift City is silent, the Indian laws apply.
Yeah.
So then, is it entirely different? How do you carve that out? So there's this uncertainty which is still there. Having said that, some of the specific initiatives, and I can talk about banking, the kind of activities that a bank can do in Gift City is very different than what is allowed in India. So all your innovative products we are able to see in Gift City. That will help deepen the market. That will help attract more foreign investors. And once you have these kind of complex products, there will be disputes. So to your point, you need to have that independent, robust mechanism at an international level to sort things out, to build that trust. Otherwise, it will be a challenge.
If I can just segue into another question, and I think Gift City and a lot of these innovations will play a significant role, right? If you're talking about 2047, so we're really talking about $3.5 trillion economy going to $20-30 trillion economy over the next couple of decades, right? And the financial landscape is going to play a very big role because it needs to finance, fund, scout for those resources, mobilize it, and channelize it, and has to have much better allocative efficiency than it did in the past. What are the changes that you think needs to happen to sort of aid this transformation that we're talking about?
Interesting that we're talking about this just before the session started, and I really believe that there is still a big need to fill the credit gap. The private sector is just about showing intent. Do the banks have the ability to support them? Credit to GDP ratio in India is very low as compared to what you see elsewhere in the world. My sense is that at some point in time, the public sector banks will need to be recapitalized. Where will they get the capital from? One will have to see. Growth attracts capital. So it should happen. But at this point in time, a vision of 2047 is I don't think we are at this point in time well capitalized for achieving that. So that needs to happen, and it may happen. The other challenge is infra, right? Any loan to infra is a long gestation kind of a loan, and I don't think the banks in India have the ability or the asset liability equation in place to serve these long term infra loans. So the bond market has to be much more stronger. Corporate bonds need to come up. There are things happening in that direction, but we need to see that coming more and more. We also need, the new thing that has happened is these credit AIFs. Without impacting a lot of people, the risk is concentrated in some pockets, which I think will help. That market should really go up. And again, from a last mile distribution, your NBFCs need to really pick up. While you have a lot of these microfinance entities, housing entities, but more and more needs to be encouraged. So that's on the credit side of it. I also believe that our regulatory scenario is fragmented. There has to be a unified regulator for financial services that will help ease of doing business, that will help competition. I also believe that financial education needs to be much more. The people at school, you need to know about investments, you need to know about risk management. I don't think that is happening at this point in time. So those things, once you capture all of these things together, maybe that will help.
I mean, your point on NBFC is just my last question to you. I think the RBI recently we've all been seeing, and I sort of touched upon this, is has increased risk weights. The governor is very clearly saying that, look, I don't think there is a problem, and that's why I'm doing it. I'm just doing it a little bit preemptively, right? I mean, trying to make sure that we the right guardrails are set for our growth path. How are you looking at it? I mean, from your perspective, since you interact with so many clients on the financial space, how are they perceiving RBI's actions? Is it changing business models, growth? What can we expect over the next couple of quarters, you think?
So interesting. When this announcement came in, people are like, "This is going to kill business. We can't work like this." But as things sinked in, they realized that this is in a way the right move. As the governor said, we don't think there's a problem, but we don't want to create a problem either. If you look at most of the NBFCs and the risk weights have been increased only on personal loans, and not on personal loans, it's consumer loans. The idea being that you don't want the economy to become a very consumption driven economy only, especially for those people who don't have the wherewithal to repay those loans. I mean, they are living on credit all throughout, like in a way what happened in the US earlier. So I think those guardrails are being put. The other thing that they did was increase provisioning on infra loans, the standard asset provisioning, which is again from an asset liability perspective. They see the intent of the private sector. There is going to be spending on infra, so that credit will come from the banks. But at the same time, we don't want a situation like we had in 2014, where there is so much infra lending and the asset liability is a challenge. So I think these steps are in the right direction. Will it impair growth? I'm not so sure. It will lead to more prudent lending, because every other parameter is right. We don't want things to go wrong, and from a gatekeeper perspective, I think RBI is doing the right thing.
Interesting. I have no further questions. I mean, in case you have further
I'll open up for questions from participants.
Am I audible? Okay. While you were talking about RBI regulations and reforms to boost economy and all of that, just it was one of the questions which I had. I mean, while we talk a little on a macro level on this, I'd like to understand much deeper in terms of when the cost of money would be cheaper to do business rather, and I mean both of you all, right, from an economy standpoint and from a financial standpoint. When would one see that the cost of money is going cheaper to do more capitalization, as you rightly said? I mean, that's one thing which I think I would like to understand, while the second question can go on later. Thank you.
I'll probably quickly answer it, and maybe Sarvesh can sort of add his points as well. See, when does anything become cheaper? When there's more supply than demand, right? And in this case, it's really supply of rupee liquidity, right? One of the things that I kept mentioning is that, okay, it's a question of how do you use this surplus windfall from RBI? I mean, do you spend it on social sector programs and capex, or do you sort of pay down debt? Now, let us assume a scenario. Let's say the government does pay down debt, and you get a credit rating upgrade. So, which means that the benchmark interest rate, which could go below 6%, right? Even if it does go below 6%, then it means that every other interest rate that's benchmarked to it, the private sector interest rates come down. And the whole fact that we get a rating upgrade means that you're potentially attracting more money in. And if our growth is going to be as strong as it is, 8%, 7%, and especially if it's an investment cycle led growth, right, where jobs are getting generated, etc., you're going to be attracting more FDI and more capital from outside, so more rupee liquidity, right? And that's when you could see a fairly benign cost of capital situation.
I think the other element in either capital or interest, one is the availability, the other one is risk. uh, as we de-risk more and more, as and balance sheets are getting stronger, uh, that will also help in reducing the cost of capital, or for that matter interest rates.
If you're growing pretty strong, I mean, the risk perception also is weaker, right? I mean, if your business is doing extremely well, then the finances perceive much lower risk as well.
Good morning, everyone. So while we are talking about profits, money, and revenue, and so on and so forth, so now my concern here is, while we are seeing massive growth is happening, initially it used to be tier 1 city, then we moved to tier 2, then 3 and 4. Apparently for a business house, the challenges what we face is, as of today, while we move to tier 3 and 4 cities, the quality of manpower is a bigger problem. So now the quality of manpower in terms of education, the quality of manpower in terms of grooming, and matching the expectations. A branded organization is moving to tier 3 and 4 cities, but to sustain the quality, it's very difficult to get right people. Now we see that education is one of the biggest problem, and maybe one thing is the vernacular language, or the quality of the nurturing of those people is not in a position to match the expectation of the corporates. So now what happens, it's not always possible for the organizations to move their people or relocate their people to this tier 2 and 3 cities. Neither employees are very inclined to move. So what do you think is the role of government in ensuring that while there is a development happening, there is a parallel development to the manpower also happens in terms of human resource skills and other things, so that when we move on to those cities, because today it is tier 3 4, tomorrow it can be 5 6, and we keep on going. So what do you think is the way forward to that?
Yeah, I mean, you rightly put it. I mean, the base level education and all of that is absolutely important, and it can become a hindrance to growth, as you rightly point out, right? I mean, you want to expand very quickly, but you're not able to expand quickly enough because you're probably having to spend more time training that person up before you can go further, right? I mean, this is something that we'll have to work out. I mean, it's one of the things that you will see in policies henceforth is more about industry, academia, partnerships, etc. Sort of you're seeing this happen at a larger scale elsewhere as well, where businesses are working with universities, working with schools, trying to sort of maybe curate certain curriculum, etc. So maybe a little bit of that will have to happen. I mean, I'm not sure that this is something that the government can carry on its own, because what is required as a skill also keeps changing, right? So it really is about having that connect and that conversation and dialogue with between industry and institutions that educate, right? And a bit of a facilitation, maybe even maybe if Rishi can think of it, I mean, that could be sort of something that sparks, right? I mean, that will help. I don't know. I mean, I can't see any other solution other than a lot more interaction with the educational institutions to make sure that that you have a steady supply of well trained people in all parts of the country, right?
I feel resources are there, but only thing is it needs to be structured, and government needs to come out with right collaboration, in which even the political parties should play an important role, because most of the time we see they come and to the corporate houses and pitch that we should hire those people, but rather than coming out as a political party, why didn't they nurture those people and present it in a way that this guy comes to you with the quality. I'm competing in the market, I'm not recommending. So it's a big time for everyone to change their mindset, because at the end of the day opportunities are humongous, but then there is a big gap between demand and supply of a human resource. That's what I can see.
I completely agree with you, but if you look at how India has evolved, say from the 90s into the 2000, the businesses, global businesses, always thought that the resources in a city like Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi are not as good. That has now changed. Slowly that will percolate down, and I don't think it is only the government's job. It is the industry also who has to support. The other thing that has worked very well is technology. The availability of the right people to impart the skill or the education, however you may want to call it, is a challenge in the tier 4 5 cities. But with technology, I think that can change. The other thing, and some of the initiatives that we are seeing, is that a lot of these schools and colleges are tying up through technology with corporates, wherein they say that, okay, you come interview my people, and that database is stored. So the person didn't pass the interview because of XYZ reasons, then he knows that, okay, this is the skill that I need to build on. So if we use technology appropriately, I think that will aid. But again, it's not only a government thing. I think it is the entire ecosystem has to work.
If I can just add on to that point, even since you mentioned, language as well, even the government. I mean, I was at one of these conventions where the government is trying to sort of cross that barrier through technology, as Sarvesh mentioned. This whole Bhashini sort of thing, where this language, using AI and language modules to try and communicate with people with different language skills. So that person might be quite capable in his own language, right? And maybe technology can be that bridge, to make sure that capability is sort of transferred over to you. And just a little bit of an anecdote or on history, right? When this whole call center thing sort of started to come into India, right? So it may have percolated. It may have started in a few places, but it's now percolated to many more places, and it's sort of, demand tends to attract supply. They may not have had enough English speaking skills initially to expand, but then you started seeing more of these coaching centers pop up, right? I mean, and then try to bridge that demand supply gap. So my sense is that there is a role to play for the business to develop its capacity in a way, right? If people is the capacity, then there's a role that the business will also have to play to develop the capacity.
I mean, at the end of the day, the business is going there either because there's a demand or because the cost is low. So the business will have to play. Sure.
So just before my question, let me give you feedback about Gift City. I can resonate what he's saying. Quality of manpower, resources at even Gift City. Forget about, I'm coming from fintech industry. Forget about software people. We are not even getting operating people in Gift City. And ace of doing business in Australia and Singapore and Hong Kong, I have my real doubts. We took 4 months to open a bank account in Australia and almost 3 months in Singapore. So I think India is fairly good in that sense. Okay, so my question is, China was at $3 trillion around 2003, I think about that period. And it received on an average $200 billion as an FDI for almost 10 years. And that's how it is, maybe. So this is my question. If India has to be, let's say, at 20 trillion or something, is it really compulsory for us to get FDI of these levels? Right now we are at 80 billion, but a lot of it is, I think, in companies like us, people are just investing for the sake of majority stake. The money is sitting in bank. We have not utilized funds from the private equity we received. So it's not utilize. So even that gets qualified as FDI. Whereas China received the actual FDI, investments in plants, in manufacturing, $200 billion for average for 10 years. So do we need to do that? Or can we, do we really need that happening in order to grow at 18 or $20 trillion economy? This is my question.
I'll just, if I can just break this down using some numbers, right? For us to get to about 20 trillion sort of an economy within the time span that we're talking about, which means we have to, in real terms, volume terms, grow at about 7-8%, right? To generate 7-8%, we'll have to invest at a rate of about 35%, right? Between 30 and 35%. I mean, depending on how well you sort of invest, right? Our savings rate is somewhere at around 32-33%. It has moved up. So, which means that we have to attract foreign savings. How that foreign savings comes, whether it is a debt or equity, right? I mean, it could be anybody's guess how it comes. I mean, we need all forms. Honestly, if you ask me, we need all forms. It could be a road InvIT that gets bought out by somebody from outside, or even an FDI where, greenfield FDI where somebody is setting up a plant, a manufacturing plant. We need all of those. So, in a very simple macro sense, if we have to grow at that pace, we have to invest at a much higher rate. And domestic savings will simply not be in a position to sort of support such growth. So we have to attract foreign savings at a much higher level. And it means that we make the environment conducive for that foreign savings to come here. And what is that one environment? Simply that, look, if I'm bringing my money, I need to be able to see that I can make a profit and take that profit back with minimal cost. And not be worried that whether I can take my money back or not, right? If all of those questions can be sort of answered in the affirmative and in a positive sense, I'm sure money will come. And I think our policies are moving in the right direction when it, at least right now, and that's one of the reasons why we are receiving FDI, right? So it's more questions right now about, look, growth prospects, etc. And I think the moment growth starts to pick up, we have the right setup in place to attract that FDI. It's about FDI and manufacturing. I think that's what you're specifically referring to. So there, we discuss this whole labor laws and other reforms, etc. I mean, tricky to do. If they happen, I think those real money investors should be coming. The simple answer to your question is that we need the money, money to grow.
It's all revolved around demand and supply. That's the secret.
See, despite government initiatives and despite this 8% growth which is there today, I was seeing vehicle sales growth, which is as a barometer of our economy. As a barometer, this has been used since past many years. Two-wheeler sales, basically. For the last 10 years, two-wheeler sales average is 3% CAGR. And if you ignore 2-year period of COVID, it is still at 5%, which was, let's say, earlier, even you can count 90s and all. So why this is happening? If we are growing at 6%, 8%, our vehicles, two-wheeler sales should have been at least more than 10%, 15%, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a question that, we sort of discuss at some of the, when we get together with colleagues and things like that, right? I mean, and I sort of try to highlight, at least in the last few years, we've had a bit of an unequal sort of a growth where the bottom half of the income pyramid haven't benefited as much as the other half, right? So you can see that pretty much in every product there's talk of premiumization. So the premium product gets sold, but not the entry level segment. Premium bikes are getting sold out. The market for that is expanding, but not the entry level. And that's quite similar for a lot of other products as well. So the positive fact is that, I mean, and we discussed this, that those three main income streams for the rural segment, one was missing and it's starting to sort of recover. And I think once that recovers, we should start to see stronger sales on the two-wheeler side as well. I mean, it'll get reflected. And also, let's face it that, I mean, I think even operational costs have gone up, right? I mean, fuel costs had gone up over the last few years. $100 oil, 80, 90. So maybe that has sort of also put some pressure, and therefore try to keep for folks, within public transport rather than, and within cities as well. We are seeing that, there's a push towards public transport as well. I mean, metros are getting built out, etc. So I don't know if there's a question mark on whether to use that as the barometer, two-wheeler sales as the barometer. Whether it is relevant, but a country like ours, the size that we have, I think we still have to. I would agree with you that we'd have to see a lot more two-wheeler sales, and I think it's we should see it in the next couple of years, because the bottom half of the income pyramid is poised to catch up. Right, if we kind of generate the kind of jobs that with that investment cycle, the investment intention that is there, if those investments are put to the ground, it's going to generate those jobs, and definitely that demand is going to sort of flow towards two-wheelers, etc.
So we don't have any more questions. All right then. Well, thank you all for participating in this enriching discussion. But before we wrap up, I want to extend my appreciation to our distinguished speakers, Mr. Prithviraj, Srinivas, and Mr. Sarveshwarthi, for making the time and sharing your knowledge and insights with us today. So, since we've reached the conclusion of the Thought Leaders of India Expert Series event, thank you everyone for your time and attention. We trust that you have found this session to be of great value and filled with useful information.